Welcome to Alaskan Freedom. We're far from being done with our cabin, but our centerpiece is finished.
Yep. The hearth and wood stove are in, and this week we are going to bring you a video showing you the start to finish project of the whole thing, how we did it. So enjoy it this week, and thanks for joining us.
The first thing I needed to do was cut the durock, which is a cement board that's going to go on the wall. These are 3x5 sheets of 1/2-inch durock. They cut very easily, similar to how a gypsum board or drywall would. You just score one side, and then you can snap it off where the score is and cut the other side. You do need to clean up the end with a utility knife, and it will ruin a lot of blades, but it's really the only way I know how to cut these. Once we got it inside, I'm setting it up on shims to keep it off the ground just a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch, and I'll also be using these same shims in between the sheets and to make sure that it doesn't go all the way up to touch the ceiling. I'm making this wider than what I need just because I want to go to the width of the studs so I have good nailing. And then later when we do the decorative part of the wall, we'll just do the actual width that we need. And the rest of the durock will be covered by whatever decorative wall is going around it. Next, I bring in my laser level to find the center of where we're going to put the hearth and mark that off. And then I know that our hearth is going to be 4 foot wide, so I'm measuring off that center mark at 4 feet, 2 feet each direction. From there, place my marks, so when I build this hearth, I know exactly where to put it. This is all just scrap lumber we had left over from framing the cabin. Started off by nailing this, but after a while the nail gun jammed and I ended up having to screw off the rest of it. And then we're going to get kicked into place here and double check by measuring corner to corner just to make sure that it's sitting square. And once I see it sitting square, I'll take a couple of scrap blocks. I'm going to screw those down to the subfloor and then screw from the side of the hearth into those blocks. And that'll just hold this hearth into place, make sure it doesn't move. If you were doing this on a concrete slab, you'd want to make sure to be using treated lumber for this. And again here with these strips, this is just, like I said, scrap lumber we had left over, so I happen to have some 1 foot cutoff strips left from the roof. I put those on for the first layer, and then another scrap piece I found that was a little larger that is going up on top. I have a full 1 inch of plywood on top of the hearth framing. Took some of the durock scrap pieces and then covered the outside of the hearth. I was short a piece of the durock for the top of it, so I had to wait until I was able to get back to the hardware store again to put the top piece on. Next, I'm going to tile the back of the wall and the top of the hearth using large 2 foot by 1 foot tiles. So we're going 4 foot wide with the tiles on the back, and it will only be 3 foot wide on the bottom. I'm using a thin set that's pre-mixed on these. I don't mind buying and mixing my own thin set normally for floors, but for the But for a wall, I want to make sure I have the perfect consistency, so I don't mind spending the extra money to get the pre-mixed stuff. When you're tiling on Durack or cement board, you want to make sure and take a sponge and kind of moist the cement board first, just so there's a little bit of moisture on the board so it doesn't suck up all the moisture outside of the thin set. So I'm going to put a nice thick coat on there and then run it with a trowel, and then we're also buttering the back of these tiles since they're such a large tile. If anything, I think I maybe put too thick of a coat on these, but I'd rather waste a little bit of thin set than have them come loose on me later. It was a little dark in this room. I actually started doing this real early in the morning one day, and it gets a little lighter throughout the day as I'm doing this. I spent probably about 2 hours doing the tile. Coming back after each tile is put in and wiping down everything with a moist sponge just to make sure that there's no thin set building up on the outside or too much in between the tiles. Scraping all that out. And then once I got the wall tiles done, then I'm going to put the 3 pieces on the bottom. The bottom is not going to be as wide. The hearth is 4 foot wide, so it will match the 4 tiles, or the 4 foot worth of tiles that I just put up. But I'm only putting 3 foot width of tile on the bottom. There's going to be a 6-inch border all the way around it with the beach rock we're going to do later. One thing I like about this design is I was able to do this without having to cut any of these tiles. And I didn't have to go this high on the back wall either, but I just kind of wanted it to be a grand centerpiece for the house.
I told Jay that I wanted our wood stove hearth to be special and unique and something very Alaskan. So I want it to be made out of rocks that we can pick up from the closest beach. The first step that I did was I spread some thin set on the wall and buttered a little bit of thin set on the rock before I put it in so it will easily stick. But it's kind of like a tedious work. I never thought that it's gonna be very tedious. It's not that hard. It's just takes a lot of patience to do it. I probably did the work for almost like 15 to 20 hours to finish the hearth. So I've never done this before. It's just like kind of like an inspiration. My inspiration was some of the cool houses here around Alaska. They do have like walls that is made of rocks.
So now I'm mixing the grout that's going to go in between the tiles. We're going to have to use a different grout for the tiles and the rock because the seams in between the tiles is only a 1/16 inch, so we have to use an unsanded grout. So I'm mixing that up first, and then we're going to put that on the wall. So we put that in with a foam, I guess it's a trowel, like just a foam grout trowel, and then wipe it down with a sponge and get it to where it's just basically got a haze left. Then the grout for the rocks, we're using a sanded grout. The application for that grout would be going into a grout bag, which is similar to like a pastry bag, like something where you decorate a cake with. And when we mixed the grout to go through the bag, we made it just a little bit more runny than what the directions called for. So we wanted to make sure we got the back done first, the part behind the stove, because we want to install the stove without putting the rock over the sides, so that when we do install the stove, it won't be damaging any of the rock or knocking them any out of place. Once we got the rock and the grout in on the area right behind where the stove will be, then it was time to set the stove in place before we finished the rock around it. So to set the stove in place, we built a platform that was at the same height of what the stove will already be at, so we could just slide it over, set some wood shims on the tile, and then drag the stove over onto the shims and just drug it into place. This way the stove's never touching the tile as it gets moved around, and we're not scraping or scratching the tile up. We used a laser to make sure we had the stove in the exact right spot. Then once we got the stove in place, I just tilted it and Elaine was able to pull out the shims and we could set it down gently onto the tile so it never did get damaged. And of course, just double checking that everything is level. But I guess at this point, there's not much we can do about it, but it did come out good. We decided at last minute to tile the front of the hearth. The part that's on the bottom, the edges around the floor, we originally were going to do with rock, but then we decided that it would be kind of a pain to do the flooring up against it, and also would just be one more hazard to bump into with your toes. I was trying to do this project without having to cut tile, but we bought some 12-inch tiles and then just cut them in half. It's the first time I've ever used one of these scribe cutters. It actually works pretty well. The first cut I did didn't work. Luckily, I did a test piece first, but I wasn't pushing hard enough on the scribe, and when I snapped it, it didn't snap right and kind of bent. It cut crooked. But then after doing a test one, I realized real quick what my mistake was, and then it was pretty easy from there to cut all the rest of them straight. And then I'm placing these tiles on basically the same way I did on the back wall, just putting a little bit of thin set onto the face of the stir rock. And I did not butter the back of these tiles because they're just a smaller piece and they're sitting basically right on the floor. I did use a shim to kind of hold them up and get them all the right height, but they went on really easy and smooth, and they're a small light piece.
I really like doing this. For me, it's like a meditation. Just put in the rocks instinctively, like which one fits. It's like a puzzle. It's no brainer, but for sure it's a lot of like they put a lot of passion into it. So you know, this hearth is gonna be main attraction in our cabin. So before I put in the grout, I actually put a sealer coating first so that the grout wouldn't go through the pores of the rocks. So here's the grout bag that I use. But before I put in the grout, I sprayed the bag first, so the grout will easily glide out of the bag. After putting the grout around the rocks, that's the time I use a wet sponge to kind of like flatten. I also use my finger in a very thin metal pointer. Here I'm polishing the tiles after the grout set up. So after the grout set up, I applied one more layer of sealer on everything. And now it's done and time to start a fire.